Thanks for having me come. I'm really psyched about how active you guys have been this semester and all the stuff you're doing. I thought I'd talk about some stuff on the intersection between philosophy of religion, which is my main area, and critical thinking epistemology stuff, which is sort of a sideline interest I have. And this is actually a lot of what I want to talk about today actually comes out of psychology, but I thought I'd share a bunch of this neat research and what I think is a really productive way to look at religious beliefs in general. So let me dive in. I'm going to rattle off a bunch of pretty well corroborated, well-studied, well-understood phenomena that are sort of glitches in the human cognitive system. And I'll try not to let it run too long in the tooth here in a minute. I'll try to get it done so we can talk. But we're currently in what they're calling the golden age for study of bias in the human cognitive system out of psychology. And I want to apply some of that and think about how it might apply to religiousness in particular. I think there's a really interesting combination of things going on here. It's particularly disastrous because you've got something that I'm going to call the supernatural urge that's combined with a whole bunch of these weird, glitchy, asymmetrical short circuits that the human cognitive system really typically, predictably, consistently makes. So you've got this system that keeps making these particular kinds of mistakes, and you couple that with, and this is not a technical term, but you couple that with something's going on here having to do with supernatural stuff, and you get a whole bunch of interesting religious errors. And it's not to say that all religious beliefs are errors, but there's a really weird and interesting combination of things going on there. So to that point about supernaturalism in general, and I can tie this back to the Garcia effect, I think it's pretty resoundingly clear that humans are profligate supernatural thinkers. They believe too much with regard to supernatural entities. So whatever the truth may be about God or souls or an afterlife or whatever, humans believe too many things. They believe lots of things in that direction that are mistaken. So even if you're of the particular inclination, you think that certainly there's a God or there must be an afterlife, you have a soul or whatever, you're still going to acknowledge, you've got to acknowledge, given the just the massiveness, the ubiquity of religious belief and religious ideas and supernatural ideas, that people produce these things at an outrageous rate. And I'll show you some examples here in a minute. One way to think of it is that we're highly prone to find supernatural, magical, causal, and agency connections or explanations of phenomena where none are present. And if I was going to make one sort of general take-home message about today, I'm going to tie it back to that Garcia effect. It's that we're built to be highly false positive systems. We might have been wired up by evolution to be very stingy underbelievers or very reluctant believers, but that's not what the evidence is showing. It's not what all the research in psychology is showing. It's that we overbelieve all kinds of things. We draw all kinds of connections all over the place. So if you're doing anything wrong, if you're believing too much, there's a really basic, simple message here is that you need to rein it in. Everybody needs to rein it in because our systems go overboard so much. That is, we might have had a cognitive system that might err by being too stingy. We find minds, ghosts, spirits, gods, causal connections everywhere. I'm exaggerating, but it's actually quite shocking when you put people into psych studies and you can just induce it in them. You can just lead people around by the nose. You can give them these circumstances, give them prompts or cues, and they just start making supernatural shit up right and left. Little kids do it, adults do it. It's just, it's really quite amazing. Even people who are quite well-trained critical reasoners, critical thinkers, people who understand the phenomena are just as guilty of it, or very often guilty of it. And I noticed this today. I just did a Google search for, I was looking for ghosts, and then I did an image search, and I was just overwhelmed by the flood of photos that popped up on the image search. When you start doing these, people have found all of these spooky, allegedly seen these spooky ghosts lurking in the background in their pictures. Sort of, what do you call this? What what do you call it? Photobombs, ghost photobombs. There's some kind of sinister lurking ghost here, and you can barely see it perhaps, there's a little body shape there, and I don't know what this guy's doing, and a little body shape there. And Google just there's a torrent of these photos spilling out of Google as soon as I search for it. And I take this more as a testament to people's propensity to find faces where they're not than the commonness of ghosts. But then we can debate that a little bit if you want. That people find this stuff all over the place. And there's some weird things going on there to produce that. Okay, so the consensus these days amongst cognitive scientists is that, here's this phenomenon. If you look at, I'll give you an example by contrast. Music is a really interesting phenomenon because go to the other primates, nearby cousin primates to us, go to the apes or gorillas, chimps, they could care less about music. They don't tap their feet, they don't nod their heads, they don't dance, they don't respond to drums, they don't respond to music. Once in a while you'll see a parrot, a cockatoo on YouTube that'll bounce its head to a tune, but the rest of the animals in the animal kingdom seem to be just indifferent to music. But with humans, you play music around them, babies, little infants, little toddlers, and you can immediately get this sort of nervous system reaction from them. They'll nod their heads, they'll tap their feet, they'll dance along. It's a very, music goes right to something and throws a switch in the human cognitive system. And it's a near universal phenomenon. I mean, it would be a really unusual human who has zero reaction or zero empathy for any kind of music whatsoever. It might be somebody's pathological in one form or another. And the Garcia effect is the same sort of phenomena. The Garcia effect is another good example of false positives, where one bad night out with Carl's Jr., and for years thereafter, you can't look at Carl's Jr. So false positive here is you going, oh God, no, I couldn't possibly eat that. That's dangerous, it's poisonous, it's scary, it makes me sick, or whatever. You're probably not reasoning through it, but you're having a very strong aversive limbic system reaction to it. Oh, that's making me nauseous just thinking about it. Okay, so your system is overreacting and identifying more threats and more positives in the environment than actually are. So it's reading off more things than are actually dangerous in your environment. And it's going to, well, I'll ask in a minute, but you start thinking about why would it be that evolution would select for that kind of propensity when it might have done a couple of other things. It might have built cognitive systems that underperform or under-record or under-notice certain phenomena. Or it might have built a system that one would have assumed that would be truth tracking. Why wouldn't evolution have selected for cognitive systems that track back towards the truth? If they go too high in the error rate, either false positives or false negatives, you would think that evolution would favor, all other things being equal, you would think that evolution would sort of prune and trim a cognitive system towards true beliefs, because true beliefs are what's going to get you through your environment safely. But what happens over and over again is that evolution appears to have built you to go overboard about all these mistakes. All right, so I think that has something to do with religiousness. Okay, so the widespread consensus now, using my music example, music and religiousness, I maintain, there's got to be something sort of neurobiological and something evolutionary going on here because they're so widespread. They're so, that 90% of Americans believe in God, and the vast, vast majority of humans on the planet believe in some sort of God or gods of some kind. That's not an accident. That can't just be cultural. I mean, perhaps it is, but it sure points to, if you talk to psychologists and you say, well, under what circumstances do you think that some particular phenomena must have more to do with evolutionary character or our natures or something to do with our biology? And they'll say, well, early onset and universality. If you see some phenomena really show up very early in human babies, then that suggests it's not being nurtured into them by the environment so much. And if you see it across a wide spread of human cultures, that makes it look like, well, it's probably not isolated to just a quirk of human culture, or rather there may be some more deep biological foundation to it. So the consensus view amongst cognitive scientists is that religiousness in fact did evolve a propensity towards religious beliefs, And you get this, here's a famous statement of it by Daniel Dennett and Ryan McKay. Other approaches notwithstanding, the currently dominant evolutionary perspective on religion remains a byproduct perspective. And that's to say that religiousness spins off as a byproduct, not as a propensity that was directly selected for. On this view, supernatural misbeliefs are side effects of a suite of cognitive mechanisms adapted for other purposes. Such mechanisms render us hyperactive agency detectors, promiscuous teleologists, and intuitive dualists. Collectively and incidentally, they predispose us to develop religious beliefs, or at least they facilitate the acquisition of such beliefs. So whatever else is going on with religiousness, or whatever else might be reasonable or supported by the evidence, or having to do with the arguments, it looks like the tools we bring to the table are heavily predisposed towards religious beliefs of one sort or another. And that's something you want to know about. If you're built to make a certain kind of mistake, you want to correct for that in your navigating around your environment. Okay, so around to the evolutionary account. Why during evolutionary history would proto-hominids need to be able to quickly distinguish between agents and objects? And the distinction I have in mind here is an agent is a creature like you, or maybe you're a tiger or something that can be understood as having plans and having goals and pursuing those goals instead of just like a rock or a tree. So now, not just making a rhetorical question, why might that make a difference to us? Why would that be important?
Because we're slow.
Because we're slow?
Yeah, I'm running.
Because why would we want to run?
Yeah.
We might want to run.
Yeah.
A mere object might not matter, but that thing does. So here's an agent, here's an object. This thing clearly makes a difference in your plans. And I checked on this. Somebody called me out on it, and I checked. And humans are contemporaneous with saber-toothed tigers, which lets me have my little fantasies about. I haven't looked. They're contemporaneous temporally, but I haven't checked to see what the geographical distribution of early hominids and saber-toothed tigers was. That would be really interesting to see where were there saber-toothed tigers and humans sort of competing for the same resources. Okay, so pretty clearly you need to be able to distinguish and make a very rapid distinction between this guy and this guy for obvious reasons. He's going to eat you, that one doesn't matter. So a very rough, a very quick and dirty distinction will be between agents and objects. So here's what we think happened. An agent is some entity whose behaviors can be best predicted by conceiving of it as being aware, having purposes or plans. So you can imagine somebody, a human, thinking, well, if I'm downwind of the tiger, he won't realize I'm so close. Or you'll hear shows on the Discovery Channel where they're talking about antelopes or talking about lions, and they'll attribute some reasoning like this to a lion. They'll say, oh, well, the lioness is moving downwind of the antelope so that the antelope won't know she's there. As if the lion is sort of making deliberate plans. Well, it may be that that's the easiest way to talk about it. And the lion may not actually be sort of rationally, propositionally putting together these plans, but lions that did that were clearly selected for, because you can see those behaviors, they work, they're successful. So we think of them, we attribute intentionality to them, whether they have it or not, is another story. But attributing intentionality to them is very useful and very helpful. Kim?
Google reliably informs me that saber-toothed cats have been found on every continent but Australia.
Awesome. Okay, so you would have had lots of early hominids running for their lives.
Also, apparently there are a lot of different varieties of
Good. Okay, good. Perfect.
I actually caught like a 3-hour special on Science Channel. I was visiting my parents. Humans are actually the reason why saber-toothed tigers kind of disappeared in North America, because they're so specialized towards hunting woolly mammoths that we started hunting them, and like they're not good at hunting anything else because they're so front heavy, and they rely on using their teeth with a specific technique that's only good against woolly mammoths. So we just like took out all their food and they started disappearing.
Yeah, so I know nothing about anthropology here, and there's lots of pitfalls in these evolutionary just so stories that I have a bit trepidation about. I'm going to make a bunch of these evolutionary speculations. And there's lots of people who are better at doing that than I am. But I'll let me make a disclaimer, sort of a qualification here. Whenever we generate one of these evolutionary accounts, we say, oh, well, this might have worked well in natural selection. It might have contributed to this outcome we find in humans. There's a bunch of mistakes that we can fall into there. And one of them, the famous one, is called a just so fallacy. And in fact, it's so common in evolutionary psychology that sometimes it can be very hard to explain that it's a fallacy to psychologists. And the fallacy is, well, I find this phenomena, like humans seem to favor skinny models with big boobs. Well, there must be some evolutionary account for it. And then some evolutionary psychologist constructs a story whereby you would have expected that to have been selected for by natural selection. And then they go, see, that must be what it's for. That must be why it happened. And merely constructing one of the stories is not good enough to corroborate or to confirm the story. So there's a bunch of hazards there, and I won't go off on a tangent much further. But I'll just say that I'm kind of blundering over that mistake for the sake of some other points I want to make. But there's some issues there that people have with just so fallacy, which is not on my list of ones I want to talk about. Okay, so back to the false positives point. Is it better for your survival to see too many agents in the world or too few? Too many saber-toothed tigers or too few? If we had a choice between your system tracking and being stingy and making errors, having too many false negatives or having too many false positives, what would you expect to be the more beneficial mistake? Too many. Why too many?
So you're prepared for when one actually is there?
So, yeah, Kia?
Because the guy who sees too few gets eaten by a tiger.
Yeah, that mistake gets weeded out of the gene pool pretty quickly. The guy who's too deliberate, too slow, too reasons too carefully, well, I want to see some more evidence. I'm not quite convinced that Carl's Jr. is bad for me. Or the person that keeps making that mistake, the individual that makes that mistake is going to, well, get eaten, right? So if you're, now, so you can expect there to be some pressure, some selection pressure towards erring on the side of caution. Better to be too cautious than to be too laissez-faire, too relaxed about it. And the best way to sum this up, and I forget who this comes from, it's out of the Dennett and McKay article, but they quote another guy. This just wraps up the whole point. It's better to mistake a boulder for a bear than a bear for a boulder, for obvious reasons, right? And you may have had this experience if you don't camp very much and you go camping with friends, and there's going to be somebody in your group, maybe it was you, who is completely stressed out all night long, having watched too many Freddy Krueger, or no, too many Jason movies, and convinced that every noise, or I know somebody who's deathly afraid of going to Yosemite because she's sure that bears are going to eat her. And nothing I've been able to say to the contrary has helped. Oh, you know who's really bad about this? Scott Merlino. He's really hung up about mountain lions.
Oh, so good.
And I got so tired of hearing mountain lion stories from him, and I went and looked it up. And out here on the American River Parkway, there's been like one mountain lion sighting in a century, and one person got attacked.
There was actually one right where I hunt, and it walked right through, and I'm the most paranoid person.
Well, seeing them is one thing, being attacked is yet another.
Oh, I'm terrified to be attacked.
Mountain lions are exceedingly shy, and they're very reluctant to show themselves, and they're extremely reluctant to attack somebody. So you've got somebody who's, Scott Merlino, who is wringing their hands, worried over a mountain lion attack. Meanwhile, driving around with no seatbelt or eating potato salad, where the death rate for potato salad is 1 in 50,000. It's just outrageous how dangerous potato salad is, right? Vastly more likely that you're going to die from potato salad than from a mountain lion attack. But you've got people who sort of wringing their hands and fretting about making plans for their weekend that are built around the mountain lion threat, right? Let's go have a picnic and eat potato salad, but not anywhere where there might be a mountain lion. I thought that was funny. Kia?
Well, I was just going to say that's how sharks get such a bad name. Like sharks
Sharks.
are so rare, and they happen not because the shark is vicious, but because the shark is stupid.
I looked this one up, and there's the odds of
12 a year?
a human being eaten by sharks is 1 in 500 million. It's vastly more likely that potato salad will get you. Lightning, Ebola. There's more people dying from Ebola and all kinds of. Well, I should look that one up. Hantavirus, I bet, is way higher than shark attacks. And you're like, hantavirus? What's that? But you'll get that in Yosemite. I bet people die more often in Yosemite from hantavirus than they do from bear attacks. I should look that one up. Okay, so we err on the side of caution. We err too high about agents, and this has come to be known as HAD, Hyperactive Agency Detection Device. You are built, say the evolutionary psychologist, the cognitive scientist, you are built to find minds all over the place. And it's a little bit like you're built to find faces or find faces, and I'll show you some examples of those too. Yeah.
Okay, so you were describing Merlino. That actually sounds more like a phobia rather than just being cautious.
Oh, I'm ridiculing him.
Okay.
I'm going too far. I'm making fun of him. I don't think he's got a phobia.
But you're not talking about phobias here. You're just talking about caution. Too much caution.
Well, I suppose one could imagine that phobias are an aberrant or a pathological. I mean, I'm completely speculating, off the seat of my pants here. But maybe phobias are a pathological version or a kind of switch has been thrown too far in this direction. Where phobias are false positives, right? Where someone's deathly afraid of heights or deathly afraid of going outside. So there really might be there are some hazards out there. And there are some things to fear about heights. But when that assessment, the subjective assessment of risk, it just gets completely skewed out of proportion so that you can't function, right? It's pathological, it's gone too far. I don't think, for the record, I don't think Merlino's got either a phobia here or obsession or anything. He might be a little obsessed. I haven't talked to him about it. I showed him the numbers on mountain lion attacks, and I said, I don't want to hear about that shit anymore now. And he was back in my office talking about mountain lions like a week later. So maybe, I'm figure out what's going on there. Okay, so they call this HAD mechanism, and I want to compare it to the face. You also got a face propensity. So the same mechanism that makes us worry about the tiger has lots of false positives. And this is not the HAD mechanism. HAD is about seeing minds out there. So thinking that there's some purposeful, intelligent, conscious, deliberate entity out there that is making plans or that is making things happen in the world. Okay, that's the HAD phenomenon. But you also have a hyperactive face detector. You can't look at those probably and not see the face. I don't know, maybe you can. Maybe you can flip on
I
these.
see that one.
This is actually Smith Rock. These are climbers. I've climbed this thing. There's a monkey face, eye and mouth and nose. Now, once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. This one's in New Hampshire. They call it the Old Man on the Mountain. This has actually fallen off since then, but there's his nose and his chin and his mouth. Right, and you know what this one is?
Is that Jesus?
Mars. Yeah.
This is on Mars. And when they first saw it with one of the NASA probes that went over in the 70s and got this picture, all the conspiracy nuts and all the fringy paranormal people completely lost their shit over this. And there were rampant theories about there being these monuments built by Martians on Mars, and that this was an indicator of intelligent life out there. And you just could not get that people off of it. They were really convinced, and they still are. But of course, as soon as the Mars rotates and the sun gets to high noon, this goes away. And when the sun's going the other way, it doesn't show. It only shows, when the sun is hitting one angle. And we can find lots more of those. You burn enough grilled cheese sandwiches, and you'll get Jesus. You see the Jesus? No, so if I have to point it out, there's something wrong here.
No, I get it now.
Oh, the problem is that we got philosophers in the room, and you guys are sort of on the edges of normality. Yeah, if I have to point this out, then I've just failed horribly. The same thing here, Greta Garbo or Virgin Mary. This actually sold on eBay. People, the meaningfulness, the teleology of this, the fact that there's something going on here gets people so excited, they'll pay money for this stuff, right? So if somebody's got a bag of chips there, just go digging through, you'll find something we can make some cash off of. Jess?
No, that was just me being displeased with $28,000.
That it sold for that much money. Try not to see the face here.
USA.
Now, can you imagine being like some Iron Age peasant, illiterate sheep herder, who knows nothing about what you know about science and about the natural world and all that, and somebody for whom the world is full of magical, supernatural, sort of conscious forces, to see that happen one afternoon in a thunderstorm. You know, you could understand why somebody like that would completely lose it if they saw that.
When I was a kid, I was in Virginia, I was looking up at the sky and I saw a hand come down. That was just a weird cloud. Flip my shit.
Sure. And you look at enough clouds, you're going to find some that
Yeah.
look like something, right? This is a salt stain on an overpass in Chicago. That the best part about this is the shrine that sprung up around it. All these people got very excited that that's the Virgin Mary. So there's pictures, there's alms, there's candles, there's flowers. And I used to have a piece of news footage where the local camera crews went out there and a reporter interviewed a bunch of people, and there's a woman who's crying, she's sobbing, and she's convinced that this is the manifestation of the Virgin Mary on earth.
Is that a whole body or is that a face?
I think it's supposed to be
The shrine.
like her hood or her dress.
In the camera, it looks completely like she's there, like going like this. But on
In
that
the
screen,
camera?
but in the camera, you can totally
on
see
YouTube.
it.
So yeah, I mean,
Way better.
none of those folks, of course, paused to think about why the Virgin Mary would choose a grubby concrete overpass in Chicago in February to manifest herself to the world. Surely she's got better things to be doing. Now, back to the face thing, I couldn't find an animation I really like. This one doesn't do it as well as I'd like, but you're wired up to see faces as if it bulges out at you, it's convex. So you're wired up to be very sensitive to find faces and to see them a certain way. So there's this illusion that when we take a mask and rotate it, and when it hits a certain point, at the inside of it hits a certain point looking at you, it'll look like it's sticking out instead of being inside. Your visual system is very bad at seeing the inside of faces, which is a good thing. You don't see many of those. I should bring a mask and I could show you. It's really eerie. And it's just one of these neat little tricks that reveals a glitch in your system. You are a face detector. Is one of the highest priorities in your cognitive system because faces really matter, what they're doing, and it's very sensitive to find them. Yeah.
At Disneyland, I don't know who's been there. This is more of Northern California, but I'm still in California. But at Disneyland, there's a specific ride. It's I forget what it's called. It's that one based off of Halloween and
Haunted Mansion.
Jack. What's it called?
Haunted Mansion.
Yeah, the Haunted Mansion. They actually have like a few of these faces, and they're just like someone's face, but it's pulled out, so it's opposite, and it looks like the face is staring at you. It's just the optical illusion you're speaking of, and they use it in.
I need to bring. I've got some stuff at home. I can bring it up because I need to show it to you. It's really eerie when you see it. I've seen negatives. I've even cast negatives. Molded somebody's face, and then you pull off the mold and hold it up, and it looks like it's sticking out at you.
Yeah.
And you go, huh? And look at it, and it just doesn't. You put your finger in it, and you know that the thing goes in, but it looks like it's sticking out. It's really a powerful illusion. Okay, so what's interesting here is that what that does is it reveals this built-in glitch in the cognitive system to the cognitive system. So here's you sort of facing up, no pun intended, facing your own sort of error machine, right? And it's harder to see how that might feed into religious belief, but not that much harder to see how that's feeding religiousness or a variety of supernatural views on the side, how the had can do that, and I'll show you how I think some other fallacies and biases and mistakes are doing it too. And I won't go through all this, but let me just briefly explain the way the very best psychologists in the field are thinking about what's going on here these days. Daniel Kahneman and Tversky got the Nobel Prize for some of this work. And you will have encountered this if you've been around Randy Mays very much. But they call it dual process theory. And part of what's going on there with you making a very quick judgment about the tiger or about the agent versus the object is they call that system 1 processing versus system 2 processing. And system 1 processing happens very early on in the neural stream. It happens on the basis of very little information, and it makes very rapid, quick, and dirty assessments of what's going on. That's the system that lets you hit a baseball that's coming at you at 80 miles an hour, or not hit, or try. The one that lets you swing, that your body and your nervous system are acting long before your frontal lobe has even had time to ponder what's going on. So a major league batter is acting before they're even sort of frontal lobe aware of the ball leaving the pitcher's hand. You can measure the reaction times, and the reaction time, that batter has to start reacting long before the signal even gets to the frontal lobe. There's other more basic systems here that are making the decisions for you. Now these are very fast, and what happens here is that what you gain in speed, you lose in accuracy. So there's a sort of trade-off. System 2, the frontal lobe stuff, can operate very slowly, very deliberately, carefully. This is your philosophy organ here. This is what you're doing when you're reading Socrates and you're pondering justice and you're thinking through the implications of your argument, your paper. That's all system 2 stuff. Slow, deliberate, rational, objective, influenced by facts, logic, and evidence. Meanwhile, this thing is going and making all of these sudden, very rapid assessments of little things going on in your environment, like a bug flying into your eye, and you blink to keep it out of your eye before you even realize what's happened. So the thing is, you trade off speed for accuracy over here, and you trade off the accuracy not in false negatives, but false positives. So this system, this fast, quick, and dirty system, reacts very quickly, and it goes on the high side. It goes on the finding too much, too profligate, too many cases of X, Y, or Z in its environment, rather than the other way around. So it makes errors in a very particular direction, over and over and over again, in all these different ways. Okay, so my take-home message is about false positives. Actually, not that kind. System 1 is built to make fast assessments of potential threats, problems, or hazards on the basis of very little information. It sacrifices accuracy for speed, and it shoots first, asks questions later, and it does it into the positive, false positive negatives, false positive direction. A propensity to believe falsehoods can evolve is the consensus here. And this is a bit of a surprise, this is a bit of a controversy in cognitive science 10 or 20 years ago when people started arguing this, that why would you expect falsehoods to come out of a system like this? And we've now seen exactly why. And it's fitting with all the data. It fits with the way humans act in the lab. It fits with the way they act when we test them. Okay, so as if maybe I can belabor the point here, how much do they believe? 81% of Americans believe in hell, 75% believe in angels, 70% believe in the devil, 29% of Americans believe they've been in contact with somebody who's died. That's the HAD system at work. 20% think they've seen a ghost. That's got to be too low. I'm going to go check that. That's got to be too low. I know I've seen Gallup data on that. It's much higher. 50% of Americans claim to have had a mystical experience. 24% believe in reincarnation, and on and on and on and on. In England, 4% report believing that werewolves are real. Not just like, what's his name, Tyler Lautner, not that guy, but real werewolf. They think there's actually werewolves out there. Okay, so that's enough about HAD and about false positives. Here's another weird, sort of glitchy way we're built. We're not very good at thinking about disproof. We're very good at finding confirmation. I wore my shirt, my dorky shirt. You're very good at finding confirmation, but you're very poor at finding disconfirmation. I'll explain in a second. We're much better at finding examples of evidence that are consistent with an idea than we are at looking at what sorts of evidence would disconfirm it, refute it, or show it to be false. And some of you have seen this before. I'll give you the test real quick, and you better do well on it, philosophy majors. So it's a famous test. Here's 4 cards, a 3 showing, an 8 showing, a red card, and a brown card. And the question is, which cards must you turn over in order to test the truth of this proposition? If a card shows an even number on one face, then its opposite face is red. So the principle is, if it has an even number on one side, then it will have red on the other side. Now, which ones at a minimum, don't just say all of them,
8 and red.
which ones at a minimum do you need to turn over in order to test this principle? And by test, I mean possibly disconfirm it. There's the trick.
Under 8 already.
So who thinks we need to turn over the 3? Anybody? Think about that. Okay, good. You don't need to turn over the 3 because it won't matter. If the 3 comes out red on the other side, it won't make a difference because this says if it's even, it'll be red, right? Everybody see that? You're all scared to say anything. 8. Do we need to turn the 8 over? Who thinks we need
Yes.
to turn the 8 over? Okay, good. Because if we turn the 8 over and it's not red, then we've got a disconfirming instance, right?
Oh, not 8 and
Right?
red. 8
Now what else do we need to turn over?
The orange.
So this one's
Yeah.
red, this one's
and
brown.
red. Not red, doesn't matter.
Now, most people are inclined to say red,
No.
right? But what can happen here? Suppose we turn this over and it's even. Then it's consistent. Suppose we turn this over and it's odd.
Yeah, it doesn't
It's still
matter.
consistent. So you actually don't need to turn the red over. When you test people, that most people will pick red. They think that that's the second most popular answer. Brown. Do we need to turn brown over?
I said no before he said yes.
He actually did. Do we need to turn the brown one over?
Yes.
Could the brown provide us with disconfirming information?
Yeah, could have a 2.
Yeah.
You could turn the brown over and it could be even on the other side, and that would be a disconfirmation. Now, when you give this test to people who haven't had logic, who aren't philosophy majors do embarrassingly bad at it. But when you give it to just the general population, they do horrible at it. They're very, very bad at it. They don't understand what it would be to test the principle. It's very difficult to understand what would possibly be disconfirmation. So this sort of reveals a kind of bias in your system, right? So, your dad thinks that Asians are bad drivers. So he finds some in his environment. See, there's one, I told you. But you can't get him to understand what would be disconfirmation of it, right? Nothing seems to show him the other way around. You're very good once that idea is in your head. You go, oh yeah, I think maybe they are bad drivers. Okay, I thought that would be funny. It didn't go over funny at all. You're just like, oh, he's racist now. Yeah, somebody brings it to mind and you go, oh yeah, I can think of some. Well, sure, you can think of some, but we're asking this about disconfirmation, right? That's the problem. And people are just crippled at being able to do that. They're very poor at finding what would disprove the hypothesis. So much so that in many cases you show them the disconfirmation and it will make them believe the thing with more conviction. There's good studies on religious belief that when you show people what they will affirm, they'll say, yeah, that's counter evidence, that shows that what I believe is wrong, and they will actually get more entrenched. It's called entrenchment. They will believe with more conviction, especially if it's a publicly held or sort of openly professed belief. They will double down in the face of counter evidence. That gives me goosebumps. In the face of counter evidence, they'll just go, fuck it, I still believe. I believe even more now. Right? That's scary. Okay, so we're very bad at thinking about disproof. And I'll show you an example, what's called the prayer fallacy. So somebody prays for X, whatever it might be, good health or promotion or the death of your rich aunt, and then you wait, and then something happens. Something vaguely like X happens, you say, praise God, there it is, prayer works, if something kind of like X happens. But if something like X doesn't happen, you wait longer. If X doesn't arrive, then you conclude that in God's infinite wisdom, He saw that your getting X is actually not in your best interests. Praise be to God for His infinite wisdom. So no matter what outcome, prayer works. When I get what I wanted, that's because God's looking out for me. God's listening to my prayers. And when I don't get what I wanted, oh, that's because God knows that I don't really need that winning lottery ticket.
He's all good.
So everything works to support the belief rather than someone allowing it to be. And people make this mistake. You've heard people make this mistake. You may have made this mistake. See, I told you I was good at X. And I told you I could pick out fake boobs. Think about that? now you're just kind of distracted by the fact that I've mentioned boobs twice in this discussion. See, I told you I could pick it out when somebody's gay. Okay, you found a confirmation. See, I told you that guy was gay, and lo and behold, there he is. Well, maybe everybody knew it. Or what is it? What's missing? You think you've got a good gaydar, for instance. You think you're good at picking out people who are gay. What's missing from your data set probably is the cases where you thought somebody was gay and you weren't able to follow up and find out one way or another. And what's missing from your data set is all the ones that are gay and you just missed them. They went by on you. You didn't even notice them. All the good Asian drivers went right by. Meanwhile, you go, hey, I'm really good at picking out who's gay. You're just like your racist dad about bad Asian drivers.
When I was like 8, I think I had a birthday, and it was like the first birthday wish I've ever actually made. Oh, okay, I'm gonna make my birthday wish, and I wished for a Game Boy or whatever, and I got it,
Yeah.
and it's never been the way since. So at the time I was like, oh, and so then I came up with I only get one wish in my lifetime, and then it got to a point where it's what am I thinking? No, I just got lucky. That's not how it works. So yeah, I completely see what you're saying here.
My kids, my older boy's 11, the younger boy's 7, but the 11-year-old, when he hit about 3rd grade, I noticed that all of that kid culture stuff sort of sprang up in him. Step on a crack, break your mother's back, and all these weird ideas about hiccup cures. And he had this remarkable level of confidence about all these things. He was certain that if you hold your breath while you do X, Y will happen. And it just sort of it just flourished in him at about 8 or 9 years old. And I've always wondered what happened right there. Something about the developmental age, something's going on there that stuff just proliferates in the 3rd grade. The same for him as it did for me when I was in the 3rd grade, 30, 40 years ago. Okay, so in the end, you end up concluding, of course, that prayer works because everything is considered to be confirmation. Everything supports the view, even when it doesn't work. It is taken to be working. Now, again, this is not confined just to religious belief. To be fair, this is not just about prayer. It's about all kinds of things. You can apply it to astrology, tarot cards, psychic readings, prescient dreams, whatever you like. People will make these kinds of moves and end up, like I said about gaydar or whatever, and make the same kinds of mistakes where they won't count some counter evidence as counter evidence and won't see it as that. Of course, confirmation bias is the mother of all fallacies. And this, I realize now that I put it on, it's just so dorky. But when I saw this on the internet, I thought, that's so cool, I gotta have one. But here's my example of confirmation bias. Do you see it? This is the one time I get to wear this with a room full of philosophy dorks who will appreciate it. But you see, so confirmation bias is this thing. I should show an image of this. I've got another good example of it. So I'll come back. See, you can find confirmation by picking out the letters, right? So you're pulling out the bad Asian drivers and saying, "See, bad Asian drivers." So this is an example of confirmation bias. Isn't that dorky? So this one's actually quite common. Lots and lots of people think they've had prescient dreams or premonitions. You probably remember a dream you had that seemed to come true the next day. Okay, when you do the math on this, it will become evident really quickly what's gone wrong there because people really think those mean something. But of course, suppose you've had 20 dreams a night for 365 days a year for 10 years, that's 73,000 dreams. Or whatever, I don't care what number you put here, 10 or whatever. My point is just that there's thousands and thousands of these over the course of years. Now what happens is, which ones are notable or remembered? Which ones jump out at you? The one wish you made when you were a kid and you got a Game Boy. That leaps out in your memory. It made a neurological impact on you that sticks in your memory. You don't recall all the times you wished for something or that you had a dream and it didn't come true because there's nothing neurobiologically significant about those events. They just slip right by. So the ones that seem to have something to do with what happened the next day are the ones that you remember. So you recognize a few dreams that seem to be accurate. Meanwhile, you ignored 72,998 dreams, right? So your batting average really sucks, but you're convinced that you've got prescient dreams. I mean, Jesus, look, right? Look at the numbers here, right? think about, and what's missing from your data set are the, what would these be? These would be false negatives. I should figure that out. All the cases where you had a dream and it didn't match up with something, or you thought something was meaningful and didn't happen. So confirmation bias is the mistake of selecting for evidence that supports a favored hypothesis while ignoring or neglecting evidence that would refute it. And I actually have good examples of this in student emails about their grades. And I wrote it up and put it on the department blog. You should go look at it, because I had a whole string of these emails from students going, I don't understand why I got a D. Why did I get an F in the course? I made a B on that one paper, and I was doing pretty good at that one part. And I grabbed this spreadsheet, and I put all the numbers on there and say, look, yeah, you made that B, but you also skipped 35% of the course material by not turning in assignments. And I never hear anything back from them after that. But it's a good example of this mistake, right? It's always good to make fun of students to crap little students. It always goes well. But you know better than to make this mistake. So if you don't make it, you're better equipped, and you'll do better in classes or wherever else. It applies to prayers, miracle stories, fortuitous events that are credited to God, design arguments for God, selective Bible citations, doctrinal interpretations, just all over the place. So you see that mistake manifest in lots of religious circumstances. And I'll do a couple more and we can just talk. And this one, again, is not confined to religiousness. In fact, it might be even worse about sports cases. There's some good studies on this. But the buzzword here in psychology is called motivated reasoning. And teasing this one out, finding this one is really hard. In fact, you're guilty of doing this one. And what happens is that people will criticize information that's inconsistent with their prior beliefs or their preferences. Okay, so the umpire's made a call that this coach doesn't like. So you're highly critical of anything that's counter to your preferences. But it's when it's what you want to hear, you relax the critical standards. So you have a double standard here. So when Obama says something because you like him, you let that slide. But when some hated Republican says it, you can't stand it and you criticize it, you find some reason to reject it. Or you're in a fight with your boyfriend or girlfriend, and they say something and they've got you dead to rights. But you don't want to accept it, so you criticize the shit out of it, but later you go, okay, you got to go. Okay, I'm sorry. It's what you should have done. So that comes out all over the place. They call it the umpire effect. And what you can do is you can take like Stanford and Berkeley fans and have them watch a video of the same game. And the Stanford fans will consistently report that the umpires are biased in favor of Berkeley. And then the Berkeley fans will report about the same game that the umpires are biased in favor of Stanford. Do you follow that? You know that's just obvious. Everybody knows that, right? So this is your dad being like really into the Raiders or something, right? So the refs are always out to get the Raiders or something. Like this is weird sort of persecution of you. Okay, so what happens here, and again, this is not confined to religiousness, but man, there's a really robust phenomena here, and I like to call it defense lawyers for Jesus. Imagine there's a whole thriving little subculture of people who are determined, they call it apologetics, and they're just quite upfront about it. They are going to defend Jesus, period. That's just the project. That's the goal. You can go to schools where they will train you to do this. It's not about what are the grounds, the reasons, the evidence, what are the merits of the arguments. It's about defending Jesus. So imagine, some mafia boss gets caught by the FBI and they put him on trial for extortion or something. Well, what do you do there when you go hire the defense attorneys? What's their job? It's to get him off. It's not to figure out the truth. It's to get him off at all costs. So imagine that kind of inversion where believing or drawing that conclusion is a higher priority than the reasoning or the evidence, right? That's to get things completely backwards. Given that I believe in God or Jesus, nobody will say it this way. Although I've been quite stunned at the how close some of them will come to saying, that's what I'm going to do. There's a famous example where William Lane Craig, somebody asked him, well, Professor Craig, if we were to find completely compelling evidence that Jesus did not come back from the dead, that his body stayed in the tomb, and he died and just stayed in the grave like everybody else. So maybe we find some, like, I don't know what it is. Imagine some compelling historical evidence that that was true. And what would you say in that case? And he says something like, well, I just have to reject that because it's not consistent with my conclusions here. I would have to conclude that that historical argument was mistaken no matter what. And people come back and said, well, are you saying in principle that historical evidence can't possibly disprove it? And he seems to be saying, yeah, there's no evidence whatsoever that I will permit to overturn this belief. At which point I think we're just done talking. There's nothing else to be sort of debated. I mean, he's an expert debater. He's debated thousands of skeptics and critics and the like, and he does very well in those environments, partly because he's so sort of dogged and determined. And he's very clever and very fast and very experienced at it. Okay, so to my mind, that's getting things backwards, of course. And somebody like Jonathan Barron, psychologist at University of Pennsylvania, has coined this term actively open-minded thinking, where what you do, of course, first is you conduct a broad open search for relevant evidence that's open to any outcome, and you analyze that evidence and you draw the conclusion that's best indicated by the outcome. By the evidence, rather than having the conclusion direct the search for evidence. So when you're defending your favorite football team, or who you think is the best Major League Baseball pitcher, you're driven by your conviction that that's true, and you go find evidence to prove it. But that's that's inverting the order of a kind of impartial, open-minded investigation that would reveal it. Now, I don't know how you settle that question, but maybe what you do is you sit down with people who are interested in that question, and you come up with criteria. What would make a good pitcher, and how much should we weight those various criteria, and then go look at the data to see what happens or what spins out of it. Okay, so, and in this case, of course, conclusions are defeasible. We're prepared to change our mind. But here, there's an adamant refusal to change and mix those up. That's getting pretty. I'm going to skip the probable thing. There's some cool stuff there. There's else. I'll talk about this one just really quickly. This is a really interesting phenomenon about humans. Is that when you've been exposed to something, a story like about sharks. And it's been repeatedly brought to your attention, your subjective estimation of the likelihood that something will happen goes up. So when you were in high school, there may be some horrible accident, and some kid in your high school class died in a car wreck. And for the next 2 weeks, you all drove really carefully. And then you went back to driving the very same way you did before. Not because, you were actually in a very high risk group for car wrecks. But that's just an anecdote, that's a single case, and that didn't have anything to do with your safety. So its presence in your memory, the recency of the story makes you think it's going to happen more often. So if I show you, and we actually can study this, if we show you a whole bunch of really horrific lightning strikes, so this cow's gotten hit by lightning, that plane's been destroyed by lightning, that's a golfer who was, like a pro golf a tournament, he got hit by lightning. And you show people, and this is a plane, holy shit, is a plane getting hit by lightning. It's actually quite common. This guy I guess this lightning went through his shoulder and out his stomach or something. Holy shit, it's actually really kind of uncomfortable. So now if you ask people, after you expose them to a bunch of cases like that, and you test them without their knowing what's going on here, and you find ways to measure what their assessment of risk is, it'll go up just because I showed you those pictures. And you know what's happened in recent years is back when the zombie movies were really obscure and fringy, like when George Romero first came out with zombie movies in the 70s and nobody watched them, nobody worried about zombie apocalypses. But now you've got zombie stuff everywhere, and when you ask people how likely is a zombie apocalypse, they will estimate it as much higher than they used to, just because of TV in the last couple of years. They just think it just seems like, well, yeah, it could happen. maybe it's partly because you've seen all these movies where they've built up a kind of natural biological scenario
Yeah.
that makes it, elevates it, or makes it seem more plausible.
Yeah, the whole like rage virus.
Yeah, exactly. So what happens is that when they become focused, when they become the focus of attention, highly unlikely outcomes are weighted disproportionately more than they would have been otherwise. So once you think about it a lot, unlikely things get elevated. This happens to you at Fry's when you go to buy a DVD player, and you go down that long aisle with all those cash registers. And the woman at the cash register says, "Oh, do you want to buy the extra protection plan to cover you for another year?" And you start thinking about, well, what if the DVD player breaks? Oh, okay. And you spend another $10 on insurance on the brand new DVD player you just bought, because you're now thinking about the possibility that it might break down, which you hadn't even thought of before, right? So she just brings it up, and you go, okay, and you give her another $10. Okay, so that's probably enough. I've got lots more, but I'll stop there.
Yeah.
Going nuclear is good. I can't resist. And I call this the mistake of artificially elevating standards of proof for the atheist or the non-believer, or the opposition, for that matter, to levels that no one's beliefs satisfy. And Stephen Law brought this to our attention in a really great blog post. People sometimes will say, I've lifted this slide from a discussion I had with a secular humanist group, but it applies to lots of other cases. But sometimes the skeptic or the atheist or the non-believer will get heat with people saying something like this: well, you can't prove there's no God. As if that sort of entitles or makes it possible. Or that until you can prove it, it's not reasonable to conclude there's no such thing. Where proof has been, well, artificially elevated, this really high standard. The implicit assumption seems to be that only those claims that can be demonstrated with absolute deductive certainty are justified, or unless you can make me change my mind, you're not justified. And the idea here, it's a bit like the motivated reasoning example, where if someone's saying something, whatever, that runs counter to your preferences or to what you believe, you jack up the standards. So in Congress, you'll have these congressmen who have got the bare equivalent of a high school degree in high school class in biology. They don't know the first thing about the basic science, and they will proudly proclaim that they reject evolution and that they're young Earth creationists. But then when some Nobel Prize winning atmospheric scientist comes to a subcommittee hearing and tries to explain the evidence for global warming to them, suddenly this guy becomes this incredibly astute, sharp, critically minded, scalpels on scientist who's evaluating the data and taking issue with how many standard deviations from the mean this data is, and you haven't proven that global warming is happening, right? So, double standard, that global warming is not going to be proven until they can meet some ridiculous level that this congressman doesn't even understand the science behind, because it's preference inconsistent. So they're going nuclear in that case. And the idea is, during the Cold War, our strategy for winning, I don't know if you remember this, well, you won't remember this, is before you, but when the Soviet Union was building up all these stockpiles of nuclear weapons, the way we were going to win was that we were just going to burn up the whole planet. We built up our arsenal on our side, and they did on their side, that would have incinerated the whole planet hundreds of times over. So it's not like we had a couple of bombs that would have blown up Moscow, which would have been enough. We were going to send enough radioactive dust into the atmosphere that it would kill all life on the entire planet. And it was called this mutually assured destruction strategy. So we had our finger poised over the button, and they had their finger poised over the button, and the idea was, well, they won't push the button because they know that we will as fast as they do, and we'll just, rather than let them win, we'll blow everything up. We won't let you, so it's not that I win, it's that we all die, right? So that's what going nuclear is is suddenly jacking up a standard to a level that no one can satisfy for anything. And that's what happens in lots of these religious debates or discussions. Maybe we can't win the war, but we're willing to start a global thermonuclear war and destroy all life on Earth to make sure that you don't. You can't prove that there's no God with absolute deductive certainty, so disbelieving isn't justified. You can't prove it. So you can't, until you can meet that standard, then no other conclusion is justified. Okay, there's entrenchment I mentioned. So conclusions. Had leaves humans with a high supernatural error rate. We're highly disposed to produce and believe religious claims. We're strongly motivated to construct reasoning towards those conclusions and beliefs that they favor through a variety of subtle and evasive, elusive biases. We reason in order to justify beliefs we already have. We're bad at conceiving of disproof. We defend our religious beliefs by going nuclear, and our religious beliefs are entrenched. And I didn't talk about the availability, or I didn't talk about this a little bit. So I've got a bunch of references here. This is boring, but there's, good, I took it off. I've got a whole long list of big bibliography here I can send you guys to if you're interested. All right, I'll stop there and we can talk.
All right, thank you. Anyone got any questions?
Awesome.
I have a question that's a little off topic. So back when you were talking about ghosts and all these pictures of ghosts and shit, faces everywhere, it just sort of occurred to me, and this is a little off topic, but what exactly is principle that leads that should lead us to say, that should lead us to accept the psychological explanation for why we see faces everywhere, rather than accept the fact that we see faces everywhere as evidence for ghosts?
I think I understand you. Why not take all those pictures as evidence of ghosts?
Yeah.
Because of the rocks. Is the short answer.
Yeah.
Here's the irony, right? If there's ghosts out there, which there might be, and people are taking pictures of some of them, it's also pretty obvious that the vast majority of those pictures and those beliefs are based on mistakes.
Yeah.
So there's, this would be the irony that there's all these people who think that the government, there's a conspiracy in the government, and that they think that because of a neurobiological disorder, they're schizophrenics. But it turns out that the government actually is conspiring. So you've got to consider the source, I guess is what I'm getting at. We can take humans and we can put them in controlled environments, like we can show them the mask, and those are known false positives. We can induce, so some picture off the internet, how do you know it's a false positive? Maybe it's a true positive. Maybe that really is a ghost. Because we know that your false positive rate in general is really, really high. So maybe this one story you're telling me about a ghost you saw is true, but the vast majority of those stories that you tell and everybody else tells are bullshit, so I don't believe you. And that sucks for you. Right? That you're not a moral, you shouldn't trust yourself in those kinds of cases when you find yourself prone to believe. You should be really skeptical because you know you're prone to make that mistake. Does that make sense? I think that's the right answer in this case. If there really are ghosts, the signal to noise ratio is really bad in our environment. The same thing with God. If there really is a God, that's awesome. That would be really cool. And I'm just gripped to figure out the reasonable answer to that question. The thing is, we're in a social environment where the bullshit ratio is up to our necks on that question. That if there really is a God, great. I can't sort it out because of all the bullshit that everybody's spewing about God, faulty God beliefs. That even I'm known as a sort of a rabid, wide, positive atheist. I don't believe in any of that stuff. But I think this point is something that even like some evangelical Christian, from Utah could agree with me. Like some Mormon that I'm talking with is going to agree, yes, people's false religious positive rates are really high because they're not Mormons, all those people out there. They've all got the wrong idea about God. You're absolutely right. So I'm just pleading with them saying, look, you agree with me that people's false positive rates about religiousness is really, really high. So you see why I'm skeptical that you're the one who got this right in the midst of all that, especially given the holes in the story you're telling me about. Somebody just told me the other day that Joseph Smith, they retell the story in sort of Mormon culture. They retell the story like Joseph Smith was sort of sitting in the jail cell, minding his own business, reading a book, and an angry mob came and shot him and killed him. But come to find out that him and his henchmen had been fed a whole bunch of guns themselves through the windows, and they had a full-on like gun battle. But most Mormons don't know about that because it's not often remarked on. They always talk about him being sort of this martyr character. So I met this Mormon and said, I heard that he got a whole bunch of guns. And we're like, what, really? No. That was just kind of ad-lib, free association.
Because what I was thinking was, if there's some sort of like a priori principle that should lead us to accept a scientific conclusion rather than, this is evidence that it's ghosts, it would be the same principle that would lead us to accept like these scientific, psychological explanations for why we have religious beliefs rather than accepting religious beliefs. That was sort of the thing I was thinking about.
I've heard some people say that had is God's way of building us so that we can tune our radios to Him, and He speaks to us through that had function. That God built us this way so that we can pick Him up in the world.
That's what Plantinga says, right? He's got
That's not far. I don't know if Plantinga said it about had, but Plantinga does think that
He's got a sixth sense.
that lots of us have a sense about God's presence. Yeah. And for some people, or for some events, it's really palpable. It's really powerful, really strong.
Yeah.
I've had it a few times. You may have had it with like a loved one, like you're falling in love with somebody, and you have a really powerful feeling that the cosmos is aligning and making this thing come together for your sake. That the world is, there's some forces at work to put you two together. Have you had it? It's really neat when it happens. It feels incredible. It feels like that the two of you are what it's all about.
Near-death experience.
I was assuming when I had that feeling that it wasn't true. that the thing between me and her wasn't the point of the universe, but it felt like it.
No, near-death experience to bring that about.
Yeah, that's really common.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And I don't know if that's what Plantinga was talking about, but you made me read that book so many times.
Plantinga thinks it can manifest in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like it has to be a really acute, profound religious experience, like an altered state of consciousness or something. It could be just kind of a low-level resonating kind of feeling you have. It can range from intense to pretty ordinary.
So what's the difference between that and like how do you distinguish that from consciousness? Or do you say they're both?
Well, I think that feeling, the feeling that Plantinga's talking about, that a lot of people, you see, I've got to think that I'm maybe aberrant. I'm out on the edges of the sort of biological normal scale. And I do like kind of just quick and in casual polling in classes about this. And I think that I'm unusual, that I don't have a lot of these feelings. Some people are at the other end of the scale, and they will have these feelings of a presence. So it's not just your consciousness, it's a feeling like there's a presence with you. And I think that's more common for people to have. The angel, 75% of Americans believe in angels.
Yeah.
I think that thing, whatever's going on there, that kind of feeling of accompaniment, or like you're being watched over, is really common. And I don't have it very often. It's really rare for me. But I think most people have it more than me.
Yeah.
Sam?
I was just going to say, I think some of it might be results of maybe like neurological or chemical stuff in our systems that we don't necessarily understand yet.
Yeah.
Like, I'm the guy that will argue that like love doesn't exist. I don't tell my girlfriend or my parents that I love you. But when I went to my grandparents' funeral,
Sure, love
like
exists.
No, but that's just my personal.
You don't tell your parents or your girlfriend you love them.
No, but like when I went to my grandma's funeral, even though I had like no emotional attachment, like I liked my grandma, she was nice to me. But this is the lady that every time I went to her, she's like, "Why aren't you a doctor yet?" Because I come from an Asian family. But like,
Well, what you mean is you didn't love your grandma. You don't mean that love doesn't exist.
well,
You just mean she wasn't that great.
no, I'm not saying that. No, I'm saying from a personal view, I think the word love is too vague and it can't be defined as like an individual thing because we use it for there's no chemical reaction that is unique to love.
There actually is. The neurobiological foundations here are pretty well trafficked and pretty well understood. There's a whole bunch of physiological symptoms. You just didn't have them with your grandma. She didn't make you feel that way.
Well, I'm just giving myself the background that, I'm like the least emotional person.
Yeah.
And when I went to the funeral, like I found myself like unconsciously crying. Like I didn't feel sad, there was like no heaving or anything,
Yeah.
but chemically I had, like neurologically, I had this reaction to crying. And I didn't get to see the whole paper, but I know Mays did something on the nature of bereavement, I think.
That was probably me.
Or it might have been you.
Bereavement hallucinations are common.
Yeah, so I wasn't sure if there's like some neurological or chemical reaction with bereavement and other, if, it's
Emotional
not common
trauma.
knowledge. So people will mistake neurological and chemical reactions within their own biological system for other
Well,
things.
look, don't get me wrong. The mere fact that something's got an evolutionary foundation or it's got a neurobiological foundation doesn't mean it's false. The easy example is that when you ponder this, there's neurobiological stuff going on in your gray matter. And that doesn't mean that it's false, that 2 + 2 = 4. It is true. But there's brain stuff that happens whether things out here are true or false. So it could be, and here's the way I think the critics should respond to some of what I've said. They should say, look, the mere fact that there are high error rates associated with certain kinds of reasoning, or that there may be an evolutionary foundation to some of these cognitive mistakes, doesn't show that religious believing is irrational, or that it's false, or that there's no God. And I'd actually agree with a lot of that. It's right, it doesn't show that there's no God at all, but it does show that the bullshit ratio is very, very high. And that's where we got to start. That's the first thing we got to do is just sift out, how much of what it is I'm thinking and feeling might be the result of some of this glitchy stuff instead of, false positives instead of true positives.
Yeah, because like businessmen in a meeting all think they're all out to get each other, and that might not be true, but it could be true for a bunch of the other dudes on the other side of the table, right?
It might be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This kind of devil's advocate a little bit,
Please.
kind of true, but how would you respond to something like, okay, like every time I've seen a shooting star, at that moment there was a thought, and each time that I saw the shooting star, that thought was something very predominant that made a big significant, mental shift in my head and I followed through with for months or years to come. And maybe it's only been 8.
Somebody claims that wishing on shooting stars works.
No, not even wishing. Just you had a thought right then, you saw a shooting star. It's okay, maybe that was important, and you start to think about it, or even just I had that thought, I didn't think it was important, but later on you realize, oh wow,
Yeah.
that was a really big thing, and at least 3/4 of the time, it's been a really predominant effect. It's had a predominant effect on your life. So
That's
how would you not be able to decipher it's just me, whatever, the shooting stars, or it's maybe that's just because the other 25% of the time it was something that I just didn't pick up that was really important to me.
Well, I wonder. That's a really cool question. It's a great idea. I just want to isolate what's the claim being made. Is the claim here something like shooting stars are magical, or they have some kind of magical or supernatural effect on my life?
Maybe the shooting stars signified an important aspect of the thought that I should recognize.
Well, that's pretty modest. That's a pretty modest claim. And people attach, and they make self-fulfilling prophecies about all kinds of things.
That's true.
People make, ordinary natural events into significant signposts in their lives. so unless there's like a magic or supernatural claim here, I don't know if I have an issue. I mean, one thing that happens is that people's memory and their reporting of what happened is really unreliable.
Yeah.
And and this, I can do this to you too. You think you're really astute at telling Coke from Pepsi, or from different roasts of coffee down at Starbucks. You think you prefer one over the other, and the chances, I think, are really good that if we were to double-blind taste test you and do multiple trials and test against random chance, you probably are just no better at that than random chance. At least in lots of examples I've seen. I've run the Coke Pepsi test with whole classes, and they do no better than random chance at picking one from the other. But people are convinced that they can tell the difference, and they just throw down about it. They just won't hear it. They won't tolerate that idea. I had this huge, I told my Phil religion class about this the other day. I had this big argument with a guy over wine. He thought he could taste all these subtle differences in kinds of wine. And I didn't believe any of it. And we drank like 3 bottles trying to sort it out. And at the end, he just started saying, well, you just can't understand. And I went, exactly. I don't understand. You're full of shit. But then I started double-blind, my girlfriend and I started double-blind testing ourselves with wine. And so we put blindfolds on and we did multiple trials to see, and I didn't want to take anything for granted. So we started to see whether you could tell red from white. And everybody says, oh yeah, I can tell difference between red from white. But there's the famous study where they took a bunch of wine snobs, a bunch of wine experts, who wrote, they write articles and stuff about wine, and they gave them a glass of Chablis, and then they gave them another glass of the same Chablis with red food coloring, and they didn't tell them. And the guys totally gave a completely different description of the red one than the white. Because it was red, not because it tasted any different. So that made me skeptical even about reds and whites. And you tell a wine drinker this, and they just hit the roof. I'm not even sure you can tell reds from whites. And I've made so many people mad with this. This is the best, because I went to like a skeptic atheist conference, and I thought, what can I do to piss these people off? And that just sent a bunch of them off the edge. And they were throwing down about this. And I said, you guys are skeptics and you're critics and listen to you. This is like a cult to you. You're religious about wine. And they're like, So anyway, when I started doing multiple tests on red and white, I did pretty well at telling them apart. I could tell them apart about 80% of the time. So I can tell that part just from blind taste. And I think I can kind of tell the difference between sweet versus dry red wines. But if somebody starts telling you that they can tell the difference between different years and vintages, or the difference between like a charcoal flavor and a leather flavor, I don't know about all those. I'd like to see it. I'd like to see data. So and when people tell you something, I don't trust it. Because I don't trust myself. My memory's not very good at these things. So somebody says, oh, shooting stars always work for me. I'm like, look at the dream thing. I don't buy it. Yeah.
I mean, that's how divination works, right? Like tarot cards and stuff like that. Like you show someone a tarot card that has certain symbols that have cultural significance. It's going to make them think, you see a card and you're like, this is a woman and this woman is going to be important in your life in this way. You start to think about what woman in your life
you create a story for that.
Yeah. And then it actually does something for people because it motivates them to be like, oh, well, this is something that's important to me. So maybe they start developing that relationship with that woman. So I think that would be the same thing. If it was something where you're like, this is significant, and then it motivated you to act in a positive way in your life.
Well, that was one of my big things I was trying to get away from. Is it wasn't motivating. It was just in retrospect, that's what I was thinking, and all of a sudden you kind of whoa, it means something I didn't realize it meant. Not more of it's gonna adjust my future. You're just kind of oh, in the past, this is what happened. Wow.
It's scary how unreliable your memory is.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
People will co-opt other people's memories. One person will tell a story, and then somebody else you can catch them later, and they will start retelling it as if it happened to them. Ronald Reagan, in his second presidency, used to tell stories about being in World War II. And it turns out, he didn't serve in World War II. He was in movies from World War II. And he would retell stories from the movies as if they'd happened to him. And it's co-opting, where the people, you just take on somebody else's memory. And every time you re-access it, you restructure it and change it and build the thing up. And it feels like it's authentic to you, and it feels
Well,
like
if you write it
you love
down though, like you make scientific notes.
There was a great study where when the Challenger space shuttle disaster happened, there were some psych professors who that very same day, or the next day, asked their students, write down where you were and what was happening to you when you found out about the Challenger shuttle disaster. It's a little bit like maybe your parents or grandparents, where were you when JFK got shot? It's this like profound moment in their lives. And they ask them, would that be your parents? How old are your parents? Are they my age? Your parents in their 40s?
Yeah.
Okay, so ask your grandparents. So this was 62. So ask your grandparents. So your grandparents were probably adults. Where were you when JFK got shot? And they will tell you immediately, very vividly. Okay, so the psych professors, they went and asked a bunch of students, where were you, what was happening when you heard about the Challenger disaster? And they asked them the day after. And then they came back and asked them 2 years later, and they had them write down the story of where they were and what was happening, and the stories go like this. But the same people 2 years later go, oh yeah, I remember it really vividly. I'm absolutely sure this is what I was doing when I heard about the disaster. Like 9/11 maybe.
I have no idea where I was. I was at school, I think.
So it's just chilling. When you read the memory research, it's chilling because you're like, oh fuck, my life is a lie. Everything from yesterday back is a confabulation. I just made all that shit up. And who knows? Roll the dice. Who am I? Where did I come from? I have no idea. I mean, I've got my memories, but fuck those, they're no good. They're totally unreliable. Maybe you shouldn't go read the memory research. It's too late. It'll give you an existential crisis. Because you just exist for like an hour or two, moving through time. Ooh. Sam?
So, like, the common thread for a lot of the, supernatural and religious things seems to me that people are really unwilling to accept statistical evidence as, like, overwhelming scientific evidence that something would exist. So, like, as a society, what do we do about that? Like, how do we get people to start accepting statistics when it's, like, the most accurate thing we have?
Well, I don't know if statistics is the right word, or even scientific here. I mean, there's some cases where scientific evidence counter-indicates some religious beliefs.
Yeah.
Like the prayer thing.
Well, not even like religious though. I'm talking about just for like critical thinking processes and like common everyday fallacies. How do we? Is there a like? Do you think we need to make a shift towards this is a core thing. You need to be able to understand statistics and critical thinking. Like,
well,
should
more
this be
philosophy
taught, like
classes.
6th grade type thing? Because
Yeah.
I don't know what everyone else's experience. I can't say what statistically the experiences are, but I never had philosophy classes available to me until I got to college, and like statistics was an optional thing in high school. So.
Yeah, well, statistics only help so much because it tells you about rates and what might be true, but it doesn't tell you how to reason critically about it. But you're absolutely right. Philosophy, critical thinking stuff like I'm showing here is not a typical part of mainstream K through 12 education. And I don't, that's too big a battle. I wouldn't propose we fight to make that happen.
And I've just seen a lot of...
It's a college degree. It's not a college course. It's not something that, I mean, it could be taught at the lower levels, but it's just typically not. So it's got to make it in there other ways. What we do know is that as education levels go up, supernatural beliefs drop off in populations. So they believe in less and less of the werewolf stuff and the evil demons and hell and all that stuff. That all drops off as education rates. It's not to say that no smart, educated people believe that, but lower rates of them do. So education works to some extent to weed out some of the false positives. Daniel Dennett thinks that we should have more religious education at the K-12 level And by that he means like a cross-cultural introduction to religious traditions kind of course. That were you to expose little kids to the major religious traditions and what they all believe, it would prevent some of the kind of fierce provincialism. Because as it stands, parents get to pretty much control all the religious ideas and information that little kids get. But if kids had a, like a basic, kind of like you take a humanities and religious studies class where you take a survey of world religions, and if little kids got access to something like that, in like the second or third grade, it would really help for them just to have more knowledge about what religious traditions are out there on the planet, and that has a liberalizing effect and prevents some of the kind of intense fundamentalism and intolerance that those people would have otherwise as adults. I think it's a really interesting proposal. I'd like to see some data that where you try it and see what happens with little kids when you do that to them.
And my thought process with this is there's a lot of studies that show like the decision-making process that you use for the majority of your like reasoning life or like are established, when you're in the ages like 10 to 14.
I don't know about that.
Just like your common practices, like they can be changed, but to change after that is way harder. Like the same way that you learn a language much easier when you're at a younger age. It's something with the chemistry of the brain.
I don't know if I buy that, but I do think this is right. That when that this system produces certain kinds of beliefs and this one produces others, and that people can get better at this. They can, although Daniel Kahneman, he's one of the guys who got the Nobel Prize for this, and he says, I've been working on this my whole life and I don't think I'm any better at it than I was. So he's a little bit pessimistic about it. But maybe the key is, that's a liberal arts education right there, is developing all of those capacities. There's a lot of ways to do that. And this is where bias and racism and sexism and intolerance and all kinds of problems spring from this system. So the more we can develop that and pursue that in people, the better. There's lots of ways to get that, I think. Jesse?
Well, with what dude's saying, it's like, but realistically, like, do you need the whole of the populace to be able to do that? Because Rod the mechanic believes in ghosts and God, but he can squeeze 700 horsepower with a 350 cubic inch engine, like we're all philosophy majors, but we don't all need to be.
Well, but what makes him a good mechanic is being able to do that. I mean, if you've had this conversation with a bad mechanic, you know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah.
Or doctor even. I mean, doctors will, you say, what now? How did you get to that conclusion? And they don't understand it very well. There are good mechanics and better mechanics and bad mechanics, and the difference is going to be how well can they understand the options,
Yeah.
and understand the variables, and understand that this works and this doesn't work, and they can be just as fuzzy-headed about what makes for more horsepower as anybody else.
Yeah.
And they need those very same skills, logic skills.
Well, that's the thing. Rod the mechanic's actually a real guy. I skate with him, and he's like 45, and he's super gnarly. But he's a fucking wacko. But he's still like, he can like fix my car no matter what.
Yeah.
But like, he fixes my stuff, and I know what he's doing is totally ass backwards.
Yeah.
But then in the end, he always just like makes it out, and I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, I guess we have two goals. I mean, the goal that we're after in the philosophy department at a big state university is that we're trying to foster these basic principles of a liberal arts education, and that's good for everybody. So you have some 19-year-old kid from Citrus Heights who, was raised in some Russian Orthodox church and never had any idea about any contrary views whatsoever, and they stumble into my philosophy of religion class, and they get all these new ideas, stuff they've never heard of, never even thought of, and that has a broadening effect on their perspectives, and they realize, they get more tolerance for people with contrary views, and realize, oh wow, I guess I can see how you can see it that way. oh wow, I had no idea that people thought that. And they realize maybe what I think is wacko, or maybe maybe they've got something to contribute. So liberal arts education is good for people that way, we figure. Yeah.
I just think it's interesting to note that how we often focus on this sort of, for example, we have the so-called four horsemen of new atheism, with Dennett and Dawkins,
Harrison Hitchens.
and they criticize these. They have various criticisms about God and all of this, which is of course very reasonable. But then there's also this sort of dogmatic science, where, for example, for a while, string theory, that was something, a novel idea with big implications. But now most of physics has abandoned it because there's just no empirical way to test it. Yet it's still a major branch of theoretical physics. I think we need to question not just religion, but even the sciences.
Well, I think that's exactly what does go on in those departments, is an unbelievable level of critical scrutiny on these different views. And that, nobody's perfect at it, but the very deliberate goal for a physics department or somebody in chemistry or biology or whatever is to subject their ideas to peer review and to find problems. So I'm not quite sure I understand or agree with several of the things you're saying about physics in general. I don't know if I understand that well. But I think the ideal standard that everybody aspires to is not to be dogmatic and subscribe to some sort of doctrine that you have to believe, like in my defense lawyers for Jesus example, but that science, the very purpose of it is to find disconfirmation. And that when they do, they reject those views, and that the peer-reviewed consensus that emerges out of that process is the best thing we have. Now, that changes sometimes, but that product has been subjected to the fiercest critical scrutiny we can muster. And I take it that that's very different than what's common in religious institutions.
But it nevertheless persists, and I don't see why science has abandoned that completely. You can't, it's sort of very unreasonable to think that one can prove the existence of a multiverse or a parallel universe that are byproducts of this sort of this scientific theory. And it's still taught. So I don't see why that belief is maintained. Is it merely because it has scientific credentials behind it?
Well, I think my impression is that there are different propositions that have different status within a discipline, and some of them have a more robust peer review, widespread consensus than others. And so, say, take evolution. Nobody seriously in biology thinks that there's any question about whether or not evolution's happened. And that only happened as a result of this peer review process. But within that framework, there's still some hotly contested questions, and there's still some issues that there's divisiveness about. And that what happens over time is that you keep hashing it out, and then ultimately the discipline and the positions develop, and we find ways to disconfirm or to converge on the right answers, and we throw out those views. So at any given time slice of physics or whatever discipline, there's always some stuff that's there's a wide consensus on, and then there's stuff that's being hotly contested. And my sense is that string theory is still in that latter category. It hasn't been widely rejected. I mean, you sound like you're dismissive of it, but there's still enough people in physics who think it's important enough to pursue it that they're having an active debate about it. I certainly don't think we've got anything that disproves it yet. That doesn't seem to be the consensus. So it's still an active debate, and I take that to be a real virtue of the method, is that we keep arguing when we don't have the answer settled yet. Kia?
Two things. One, it says up there that system 1 can be overridden by system 2, but that isn't usually true, is it? Because if it were, like, Garcia effect would exist. And
The what? Yeah.
And,
Or the mask illusion.
Yeah,
But what about the bad Asian driver thing?
yeah, I guess sometimes it can be overridden. And the other thing is that
Or
it's
confirmation
5
bias?
o'clock, and we will get kicked out of this room shortly.
We will?
Yeah.
They're adamant about 5 o'clock?
Yeah.
I had a quick question. With regards to dual process theory, does it not seem beneficial to get to a point where human beings are functioning with system 1 and having other human beings just being part of system 2 and be like, oh yeah, that's right, because the ultimate goal would be able to do system 2, but at a system 1 type of process?
I don't want these people voting.
No, but what if those people were just as efficient as system 2 but doing it quicker? Would you not?
Well, that sort of breaks down to the system 1, system 2 divide. They're fast. I mean, this part of your system is fast, but only at the cost of accuracy.
Okay, but that's what I'm saying. Like, what if they like got to the accuracy equivalent?
Well, I don't know what that means. You're talking about rebuilding the human hypothalamus, or like rearranging the way the thyroid gland works, or something.
There's a direct chemistry
The
look
brainstem.
at how system
I mean,
2
this is
works.
brainstem
So,
stuff. It's at the bottom base of the human brain, and it's where like optic nerve routes information there first. So I don't know how.
But like if humans, or obviously because there's a wide range of how well it's going to work and how well it's not going to work. If there was a human who was doing system 2 at system 1, would you not think that is the way to go, or the way that we're maybe evolving toward? Possibly, or is that a little too controversial?
No, that doesn't really make sense. This is
I do not have any accidents.
this is the whole human brain.
Yes.
So it's not like you can make somebody into one or the other of these.
No.
This is like saying,
But like an outcome.
you know, thumbs are good for one thing and index fingers are good for another. Well, shouldn't we have all thumbs?
No, that
He's talking about evolution.
Maybe I'm not being clear enough.
I'm like, but there is.
Yeah, no, yeah.
They think we should leave.
Yeah, we probably
Thanks
should.
very much
No,
for your time.
Yeah, thank you again.